Hello, everybody. My name is John Lamb, and this is Shakespeare Off the Shelf.
Let's talk about Shakespeare, Shakespeare, Shakespeare. For how long? As long as it takes, but no more than 11 minutes.
Today, I'm really excited because today we're going to talk about can fairies cause climate change? In Act 2 of Midsummer Night's Dream, here it is. Oh, there it is, one of those. In Act 2 of Midsummer Night's Dream, we meet the fairy queen and king, Titania and Oberon. And they're having a fight. They're not too happy with each other. Ill met by moonlight, proud Titania, says Oberon. And they get into an argument pretty much immediately, right when they meet each other. And Oberon brings up the fact that Titania has, according to Oberon, is actually the reason that Theseus has acquired something of reputation for being a love him and leave him kind of guy. So he says, "How canst thou thus for shame, Titania, glance at my credit with Hippolyta?" He's referring to the fact that Titania has just reminded him that he's in love with Hippolyta. "Knowing I know thy love to Theseus. Didst not thou lead him through the glimmering night from Perigenia, whom he ravished, and make him with fair Aeglis break his faith, with Ariadne and Antiopa?" He's praising these women that Theseus has loved and left. Seems like a real problem for Theseus, doesn't it? But Titania has this really interesting speech. I'm going to read it and then talk about it. That's all the video for today is for. She responds, "These are the forgeries of jealousy, and never since the middle summer's spring met me on hill and dale, forest or mead, by paved fountain or by rushy brook, or in the beached margent of the sea, to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind, but with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. Therefore the winds, piping to us in vain, as in revenge, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs, which falling in the land hath every pelting river made so proud that they have overborne their continents. The ox hath therefore stretched his yoke in vain, the ploughman lost his sweat, and the green corn hath rotted ere his youth attained a beard. The fold stands empty in the drowned field, and crows are fatted with the murrian flock. The 9 men's morris is filled up with mud, and the quaint mazes in the wanton green, for lack of tread, are undistinguishable. The human mortals want their winter cheer, no night is now with him or carol blessed. Therefore the moon, the governess of floods, pale in her anger, washes all the air, that rheumatic diseases do abound. And through this distemperature we see the seasons alter. Hoary-headed frosts fall in the fresh lap of the crimson rose, and on old Haim's thin and icy crown an odorous chaplet of sweet summer buds is, as in mockery, set. The spring, the summer, the chiding autumn, angry with angry winter, change their wonted liveries, and the mazed world, by their increase, now knows not which is which. And this same progeny of evils comes from our debate, from our dissension. We are their parents and original." I love this speech. I've always found it so interesting. Partly I find it such an evocative, albeit anachronistic, kind of way of describing climate change, where the seasons are confused. Particularly, I think of the way in which flowers get bitten by spring frosts. Even though the spring is there and the flowers are budding, we still get a frost of winter coming in. She says that there in the middle of the speech. But the interesting question for me, the question that this long, beautiful speech introduces, is why is it in the play? It doesn't seem necessary at all. It's strictly not necessary in terms of the action of the plot. And so we have to ask, why is this speech here? What is it supposed to do for how we understand this play? And I have several related reasons. They actually build on each other. They're not necessarily the same, but they're also not necessarily super distinct. The first reason is simply character development. That here Shakespeare is drawing out, filling out the character Titania in ways that will make it meaningful later. When, for example, she falls in love with an ass, because there we see another sort of powerful fairy magic creating changes in the world of the characters. Just like here, the fight between Titania and Oberon is causing all of these climatic convulsions. And so it's preparing us in some ways for the dramatic action of the play. The play is also about to feature one character putting juice on another character's eyes, 2 characters, 3 characters, in fact, in order to change whom they desire. And so there's clearly not a world of like human subjects and natural objects that are perfectly separate. This play is about a world in which there's this constant ecology of relationship between the subjects and the objects, between people and nature, between the culture and society, we might call it, of the fairies and the rude mechanicals and the nobles and the aristocrats and the natural world. So this little description that Titania gives is basically preparing us in the world of the play for what's to come. Another reason that this speech might be here is to raise the stakes of what's happening in the play. It prepares us that there's something, it announces to us as audience members about the human characters in the play, that there is something outside of their experience that is affecting their lives. So think about the way in which Oberon and Titania can talk about Hermia and Helena and Demetrius and Lysander and Theseus and Hippolyta and everybody without there being any reciprocal value here. So the humans don't get to talk to the fairies. The humans don't know the fairies are there. The only way the humans experience the fairies is when the fairies are doing things to them or messing with them or confusing them. So the fairies exercise a kind of epistemological proprietary relationship over the humans because they influence their lives. So in some ways, what's happening with this speech is it's actually raising the stakes to show us, to announce to us that asymmetrical relationship between fairies and humans. I think that's really interesting and important. And third, and I think this goes right along the same lines but takes it further, is that this speech actually heightens the gap between the humans' characters and everybody else's. So specifically, it heightens the gap between what we see even moments after this speech occurs between the lovers, who, for all the world, think of themselves as being in a world without fairies, in a world that has no magic, in a world where desire is simply desire, and there's nothing else to it. And so this speech is actually heightening the gap between that human character level of knowledge and the fairies. But it's doing more. It's also heightening the gap between what we, the audience, know about the world of the play and what those human characters do. So not only do the human characters not know that there are fairies, we do know there are fairies. We also know, and we're about to get shown this in just a moment, when Puck lays the juice on the wrong lover's eyes, we actually know more even than the fairies. So if there's an asymmetry between the humans and the fairies, then there's even greater asymmetry between the humans and the fairies and us, because we have a special, I used the term proprietary earlier. I don't know that it's proprietary. It's simply epistemological. It's that we know more than they do. Scholars like Maurice Evans have written about this at great detail. Maurice Evans called it discrepant awareness. In my own scholarship, I've called it the bifold episteme, which I think sounds really fun. It sounds like a wallet. But the fact that it's a bifold thing, right? So like we, the audience, have a kind of perspective. We have an awareness of the play that none of the characters do. And the characters in the play, like Puck, that seem to us to have the closest kind of knowledge toward us, they still have a limited amount. Because we know, for example, that Puck is a human actor portraying a fairy. Puck doesn't know that. And finally, and this is where it gets even more interesting, there are scholars who have argued that Shakespeare is referring to actual historical events here. That the frosts in spring, or the cold days when it should be hot, that the rivers overflowing their banks, the contagious fogs, as well as the diseases like the plague that Titania makes real clear reference to, that those are actually historical things that were happening in the 1590s. And so those scholars argue that Shakespeare's actually invoking those now, in this moment, as a kind of, let's call it a kind of nod to the real world. But see, that's where it's really interesting, given what I just said about the relationship between the characters in the play and we, the audience. Because when Shakespeare has a character in the play refer to events outside the play, what that does, interestingly, is it folds those two worlds together so that the things that cause us great discomfort in the so-called real world of audiences and real bodies and actors are also the things that are troubling the characters in the play. It's not that they represent those things, it's that they aren't directly referring to those things. So there's a way in which he's created this separation that I spoke about a minute ago between what we know and what the characters know. But he's also folding that separation back together. He's decomposing or breaking down the distinction, even as he's created it. And I think that's really interesting, because what it means is that Shakespeare is taking the question of ecology really, really seriously. Ecology being the study of how things are related to each other, and natural world and its relationship to what we call culture or society. And in this way, I think Shakespeare's being distinctly pre-modern. He's introducing the question, how do we understand our relationship to the world around us? Because if you're sitting in that theater and you hear Titania, an imaginary character, refer to historical events that have just happened in your very world, that you have heard and seen, the river overflowing, for example, then you have to, it invokes the very question, how do I understand that? In the world of the play, it's because these fairies are having a fight. Now, I don't think Shakespeare is suggesting that there are fairies in the real world. Maybe he is. What he's suggesting is it's not an answer to the question. It's actually provoking that very question. How do we understand what happens when things seem out of order? How do we understand it? And the rest of the play is actually an exploration of exactly that question. Because everything that happens from here on out requires characters in the play, human characters, to pose that question to themselves. And the best they can do at the end of Act 4 and beginning of Act 5 is to articulate it as a kind of dream. But we'll get there later. All right, that's all I got. I'm getting really excited. I got to cut some of this down. I'll see you next time for more of Shakespeare Off the Shelf.